In 1822, you're walking down a street in London. You see a sign in a window. A brand new South American country is selling land. A 350-page guidebook describes the capital city, domed cathedral, paved boulevards, opera house, 20,000 inhabitants. The Lord Mayor of London has hosted the country's prince at a banquet. So you do what any reasonable person would do. You sign up. You convert your savings into the new country's currency. You sell your home. You board a ship with your family. 2 months later, you arrive on the coast of Central America. There is nothing there. No city, no port, no bank, no people. Just jungle. You have just been part of the strangest scam in human history. And the man who did this to you is not in jail. He's in his London office, signing up the next 200 settlers for the same trip. This is the story of Gregor MacGregor. Explained simply, most people when they hear about this scam assume the victims must have been stupid, lazy with their research, easily fooled. The historian Tamar Frankel, who has studied financial fraud for over 30 years at Boston University Law School, argues the opposite. Her research shows that the people MacGregor scammed were among the most informed Britons of their era. They read newspapers. They consulted bankers. They knew about real South American investments. So how did they fall for a country that didn't exist? To understand that, you have to understand the man. Gregor MacGregor was born in Scotland in 1786. He grew up obsessed with two things: aristocratic titles and impressing people. At 16, he bought himself an army commission with money he didn't really have. He started telling people he was descended from Scottish royalty. He wasn't. But he wore the kilt. He used the family crest. He worked the part hard enough that people stopped checking. In 1810, he sailed to South America. He fought in the wars of independence under Simón Bolívar. He even married Bolívar's cousin. By 1820, he was back in London with a real military reputation, a Latin American wife, and a head full of titles he had collected along the way. Then he had an idea. During his time in Central America, an indigenous king had granted him 8 million acres of land on the Mosquito Coast. The king was real. The land was real. What MacGregor invented was everything else. He called the territory Poyais. He gave himself a title, cazique, meaning prince. He had a flag designed, green and white with a sun. He had a coat of arms drawn up. He had Poyais dollars printed at a Scottish bank. Then he commissioned a 350-page guidebook to a country he had completely made up. The book described Poyais in luxurious detail. The capital city had a domed cathedral, an opera house, paved streets, 20,000 inhabitants, and a national bank. The land was fertile. The climate was ideal. There was even gold in the rivers. He sold this book in London bookstores. He opened an investment office. He sold land grants. He sold government bonds at attractive interest rates. The Bank of Scotland helped underwrite them. A British Army officer who had visited the actual Mosquito Coast was paid to publicly confirm that Poyais was real. In 1 year, MacGregor raised the equivalent of about $30 million in today's money. And then he started recruiting people to actually go there. In September 1822, the first ship sailed from London, the Honduras Packet. About 70 settlers, doctors, farmers, a banker, a jeweler, a cobbler, a pastor, families with children. They had converted their personal savings into Poyais dollars before they left, because the local currency would obviously be more useful when they arrived. A second ship, the Kennersley Castle, sailed from Leith 4 months later. 200 more passengers. When the first ship reached the Mosquito Coast in 1823, the settlers found nothing. There was no city, no bank, no paved streets. There was a confused indigenous chief who had no idea why all these Europeans had arrived in his territory. Within weeks, malaria and yellow fever swept the camp. The pastor was the first to fall. Then the children. then most of the adults. By the time a passing British colonial officer organized a rescue mission, more than 2/3 of the original 250 settlers were gone. Around 50 made it back to Britain. Now here's what changes the way you think about this story. When the survivors got home and started telling their story, the British public did not turn on Gregor MacGregor. They felt sorry for him. He had already left for France, where he was running the same scam. Same printed brochures. The French government investigated him. They arrested him. They put him on trial. He was acquitted because his defense lawyer convinced the jury MacGregor had been the victim of a misunderstanding. He came back to London, tried the scam again. People still bought it. By 1838, he was running out of new investors. He moved to Venezuela, where he was welcomed as a war hero, given a military pension, and lived quietly until his death in 1845. When he died, the Venezuelan government gave him a state funeral, full military honors. The man who had personally caused the loss of over 150 lives through a country that didn't exist, who had stolen the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars, was buried with the rank of general. Total time served? 0 days. So what actually happened here? The historian David Sinclair, who wrote the most thorough study of the Poyais scam, concluded that the scheme worked because it didn't sell land. It didn't sell bonds. It didn't even really sell a country. It sold dignity. Every settler who boarded those ships was a person who had been told their entire life that Britain didn't have a place for them. The cobbler was never going to own land. The clerk was never going to be addressed as Sir. The teenage banker's apprentice was never going to be invited to a state ball. In Poyais, they could be founders. They could be landowners. They could be the educated class of a brand new country. They could matter. That's what MacGregor was selling. Not real estate, not interest rates. A version of themselves they had been quietly waiting for someone to give them permission to become. 200 years later, that same product is still on the market. It's the most expensive thing on earth. Every cryptocurrency rug pull, every multi-level marketing pitch, every ground floor opportunity call, every fake university selling fake degrees, they all run on the same psychology Gregor MacGregor figured out in 1822. People don't get scammed because they're stupid. They get scammed because the story makes them somebody. If you watch this far, the channel's all ready for you. Subscribe, I publish one of these every week.